on this computer. You're good to go.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the second of 3 sessions devoted to resistance in the Holocaust against all odds. In this session, number 2, we will explore the topic of moral resistance, which is seldom discussed by Holocaust educators. I am Florence Link, a member of the board of the Center for Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights Education of North Carolina. We are proudly sponsoring these workshops with the hope that you will begin to view the Holocaust from the perspective of the victims instead of from the perspective of the perpetrators. I am the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors and often referred to as a 2G, which means belonging to the second generation. My parents narrowly escaped the massacre of 4,000 Jews in their shtetl in Lithuania in 1941. They were both the sole survivors of their families. I was born in a displaced persons camp in Austria in 1946, the first infant born in the camp. I moved to North Carolina from New York 6 years ago. I serve on the board of the Israel Center at Jewish for Good at the Levin Jewish Community Center in Durham, and I am president of the Chapel Hill Durham chapter of Hadassah. Our esteemed instructor for these sessions is Rabbi Fred Gutman, who has been teaching the history of the Holocaust for more than 40 years. He is an ordained rabbi and is currently the regional director of an organization called the March of the Living, which brings teens and adults to Poland for a week, followed by a week in Israel. The name March of the Living comes from the fact that on Holocaust Memorial Day, Yom HaShoah, in April, there is a 2.5-kilometer march from Auschwitz to Birkenau. Rabbi Gutman has guided 19 groups to Poland. On these trips, participants visit 3 death camps, 1 site of a mass shooting, and the cities of Warsaw, Krakow, and Lublin. Rabbi Gutman is planning a teacher's trip in the summer of 2023. Today, we will learn about important figures of the Shoah, people who saved Jews, such as King Christian IX of Denmark and Raoul Wallenberg of Sweden, among others. The aim for this second session is to answer the question, why? What gave these non-Jews the strength and courage to try to save Jews? A word about the Center for Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights Education of North Carolina, also known as the Holocaust Speakers Bureau, which is sponsoring this program. The organization has 18 speakers who can come to you on Zoom, or we can travel to your location. Participants in the resistance workshops will receive a certificate of completion after each session digitally. As well, all attendees will receive primary and secondary sources used in today's session. Please make sure your full name shows. Please type your questions into the chat box as they occur to you. We will have a Q&A after Rabbi Gutman has finished. You will be muted during Rabbi Gutman's lesson. To raise your hand, please click on Reactions at the bottom of your screen, then click on Raise Hand. And now, it is my honor to present Rabbi Gutman.
Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see everyone again. And if you missed last week's session, there's Sharon or someone will put in the chat how you can access it. But today's session, we're going to start with the what I call, and actually I got this term from Yehuda Bauer, moral resistance. Morality deals with relationships between human beings. Moral resistance is, quite frankly, the sort of resistance that one would do to try to save the life of someone else. Last week, we talked about spiritual resistance, and next week, in 2 weeks, we'll talk about physical or active resistance. These things are not, I think it was Dr. Steiner pointed it out, these are not separate things. And so often spiritual resistance leads to moral resistance, and in some instances, moral resistance will lead to active resistance. So I actually want to start off tonight with slide number 3, if I could. Okay, slide number 3, just for a second. We talked last week about Yehuda Bauer from Hebrew University and his influence on Yad Vashem. And Bauer, I just want to recall this at the end. Bauer disputed the popular view that Jews went to their deaths passively like sheep to slaughter. He argues that given the conditions in which Jews of Eastern Europe had to endure, what is surprising is not how little resistance there was, but rather how much, okay? And if you can take the slide down now, that would be good. Okay, now, in terms of moral resistance, I want to just start actually by looking at the Warsaw Ghetto. And I'm going to go through a few things about the Warsaw Ghetto very, very quickly. First of all, the whole process of creating ghettos served Nazis in three ways. First of all, number one, it isolated people and concentrated them for the purpose of deportations. Number two, the ghetto itself served as an instrument of mass murder through starvation and disease. And number three, there was an ideological function that it tried to show Jews as being subhuman, and therefore, if we can survive only as parasites, then it's certainly justified to kill us. Another way of putting it, what better way to prove that if you crowd Jews into a place and they behave like animals, okay, in a ghetto, then it serves our ideological purposes from the Nazis' point of view. And the problem, of course, is that in the process of doing all that, Jews are dehumanized, as we learned about that last week from the writings of Viktor Frankl. In pre-war Poland, there were 380,000 Jews in Warsaw. It was 20% of the population. Once the Nazis conquer Warsaw, the persecution of the Jewish community begins. In October, Jews are forced to move into a ghetto. There'll be 120,000 Jews who are forced to move in first. 80,000 Poles will move out. It's quite possible that because of other Jews being moved in from the countryside, that the total number at one time was over 400,000. So the Warsaw Ghetto was created, and when it was created, Emanuel Ringelblum, the famous historian who we'll talk about later tonight, wrote, "We are returning to the Middle Ages." And yet, quite frankly, the Middle Age ghetto was much worse. In the Middle Age ghetto, and you can actually see some of this if you visit Krakow in the Kazimierz district, was walled in, but that wall not only kept Jews in, but it kept the mob out. The Middle Ages ghetto had easy access to the synagogue. It was not a prison. Jews could leave by day and do business. But by contrast, of course, the Nazi ghetto was a hellish prison, a place of disease and starvation, forced labor, and of course, death. So everyone felt the loss of human freedom once we were put into ghettos. Our mail, if it existed at all, was censored or controlled. There were no parks, no plants. Telephones removed. Water was somewhat problematic. And these ghettos were usually put in the oldest part of town. And everyone felt the same thing, particularly the overcrowded conditions. 20% of Warsaw's population was now in 3% of Warsaw's land. There could be 6 people per room. And there was just noise all of the time. Coal for heating became known as black pearls. We felt hunger. We talked about that according to the Nazis, the average caloric consumption was to be 180 calories today per day, but the smugglers made it a little bit more than that. The hunger hits everyone. Potatoes become like gold, but there's also disease, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, flu. And the disease and the hunger killed 80,000 people in the first year. And yet historians will say, well, why did more Jews die in that first year? And the answer to that actually has to do with our topic tonight. And we come to terms with the situation there, and we do so by innovating to survive. We will smuggle in food. Our smugglers, and I'm going to show you some pictures of them shortly, were often children less than 12 years old. They didn't have to wear a badge, particularly girls who looked Aryan, blonde hair, blue eyes. There were people that worked outside in the factories that had work permits. They would bring in food. The Hever Kadisha, the Warsaw Cemetery was not, which is a magnificent, a large cemetery, was not within the ghetto. And the Hever Kadisha, the burial service, would try to smuggle back food into it. But we come to terms with the situation by doing everything possible to prevent disease. The Germans had expected epidemics, but here, when we talk about moral resistance, we have to start off with the fact that there were Jewish doctors and nurses who became heroes within the Warsaw Ghetto. A vast network of medical services was established. Typhus, which at that time would usually kill usually kill 25% of a population, was in Warsaw. It's estimated kill 12, 13%. The families became very close. Extended families were taken in. People couldn't, believe it or not, people still continue to get married. Divorces almost ceased to exist. We do everything that we can to keep despair away. There's a low rate of suicide in the ghetto, and we even create our own songs that are spiritual and moral and resistance. There was a song about listen that had the words, "Listen here, Haman, Jews will settle scores. You will get yours. We have lived and will endure, but Haman, you will go straight to hell." So we decided that hellish first year, we decided to survive that hellish first year because we decided that our existence as a people will not be destroyed. Individuals may be destroyed, but the Jewish community will live on. So officially, the head of the Jewish community was something called the Judenrat, and that's slide 4. Now, we're going to use some terminology here. If you can put up slide 4, some terminology from Lucy Davidowitz in her seminal book called The War Against the Jews. Okay, do you have slide 4 up? Great. So the Judenrat is what Lucy Davidowitz, the amazing scholar of the Holocaust, is the official community. It's this community that will have to get, or this council of people that will have contact and will be used, the Nazis will allow it because they'll view it as a liaison between the community, the Jewish community, and the Nazis. But yet the Judenrat, the official community in Warsaw and elsewhere, did more than just serve the needs of the Nazis. They organized public kitchens, they organized hospitals, they saw to it that there were orphanages. There were no shortage of orphanages. No shortage of orphans. And they also created in Warsaw and elsewhere Jewish industry. The idea was that if we can be productive, perhaps they won't kill us. The next slide, please. Okay, now that was the organized Jewish community. There are volunteer organizations, okay, which Lucy Davidowitz calls the alternative communities, that also played a very important part in trying to keep the community together and people alive. These included synagogues, social welfare agencies. There were more than one. Synagogues, by the way, it's interesting to note that that there will be 600 minyanim, 600 prayer groups, even though they're outlawed, in addition to the synagogues in Warsaw. By the way, only one synagogue, the Nordic synagogue, will survive the war. So you have this massive, today we call it a network of Jewish family services type institutions that were created, and youth centers were created as well. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the first, I mentioned this, I want to show you a little bit about the smugglers. Again, the smuggling is so important that historians believe the smugglers could have added 3, 4, as much as 500 calories to the average caloric intake of a person in the Warsaw Ghetto in the day. But again, go to the next slide. Who are the smugglers? Here you see them. They're kids, okay? And by the way, you can go, there's not much of the wall left, but a section of wall very much like this still exists in Warsaw. They would go over the walls. This is a rare picture of that. Also, go to the next slide, please. They would come out of the sewers, okay? And this is how people were smuggling in food. Again, mostly children were smuggling in food. And by the way, the women, the young girls had a very important role to play in this, because they could always claim, because they were not circumcised, that they were not Jews, and particularly if they looked for Jewish girls who had blonde hair and blue eyes. I have to just mention it, that when I just wrote it, I had an article in the Times of Israel reviewing a new movie about the partisans called, I'll show you a clip from it next week, in 2 weeks, called The Four Winters. And the Four Winters interviewed 5 women who were partisans, and 3 Jewish partisans, 3 men. And they were all like almost 90 years old, and occasionally the movie showed pictures of what they looked like when they were teenagers, because they were doing it then. We'll talk about this more. But if you don't mind my French, they were badass Jewish women. They were really tough Jewish women. It's just the opposite of what I grew up with, where you had to be a nice Jewish girl or a nice Jewish boy. They were tough. These young people, okay, look at the ages. They were tough people, people. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Here is a picture of when they were caught. Now, we don't know exactly what happened to them after they were caught, and it never was the same for all. And some of the times they were just let go, and other times they were taken away and transported outside of the ghetto and dealt with by the Nazis, usually killed. But go ahead to the next slide. So I want to talk about Janusz Korczak. Janusz Korczak was his real name was Heinrich Goldschmidt, and Heinrich Goldschmidt adopted the Polish name Janusz Korczak to write children's books. And even before the war, he became known, the name Janusz Korczak became known as a writer of children's books in Polish. Well, in the ghetto, Janusz Korczak will establish an orphanage. That orphanage, by the way, still stands to this day, and a statue of Janusz Korczak with his children is out in the front of that. Korczak did some very interesting things. That today we would take for granted as educators, but he established within the orphanage, when he took in all these Jewish kids, he established basically a student council, and basically through the student council, self-government for the kids. It wasn't easy to provide food for them. Korczak is considered to be really just an amazing hero of the Jewish people. Korczak had connections to the outside, and on one time he got news that that he and his children were going to be deported, and they thought, and the people on the outside urged him to flee, that if they could get out, they would hide him. But he decided to stay with his orphans there, and that is exactly what he did. And on the day of the roundup of the Oxion is what it was called, Korchak had, because he had advance notice, put his kids in Shabbos clothes and went down the street singing Shabbos songs. By the way, there's a good reenactment of that in Schindler's, I think it's in Schindler's List, or maybe it's in another movie, but I think it's in Schindler's List, I'm not sure. But go to the next slide, please, even though Schindler's List was mostly in Krakow.
Sorry.
Go back, okay. Yeah, here's Korchak and his kids, okay. He's the guy in the middle, and you can see these are precious Jewish children. 1.5 million of these kids died. So it's not by, Korchak will march his kids to the Umschlagplatz, the train station. They get on the train, 89 miles down the track. They will be taken off the train to Treblinka and murdered almost immediately. Go ahead to the next one. Next slide. Go ahead to the next one. We'll come back to this because I've got the slides slightly out of order, at least from my mind right now. Go ahead. The next one. Yeah, here you can see a rare picture. The ghetto wall is in the back of Korchak, marching with a flag with the Magen David, the Star of David, with his children on it. What an amazing man. This is moral resistance, folks, at its highest, taking care and trying to save the lives of these precious, precious children. Go to the next one. Let's see what that is. Yeah, and here, this is unbelievable. Maybe it's the same day, I'm not sure. But this is where they're getting on the train at the train station, the Umschlagplatz, to go to Treblinka, where they would be murdered. Okay, now let's go back to the two that we skipped, because they are two memorials. Okay, this one is at Yad Vashem here in Jerusalem, where I am, right outside the Children's Memorial. If you've been there before, the Children's Memorial is a very dark place with lights looking like stars, and they read the names of children. But here's a wonderful sculpture of Korchak holding his children. And then the next one, go to the next slide, is of, this is in the Warsaw Cemetery. Okay, this wall behind us is not the wall of the ghetto, but the wall of the cemetery where there's just thousands and thousands of mass grave there. But before that, there's a whole story to be told of Jewish life in Warsaw, and this is where the memorial in the cemetery for Korchak and his children is. Those of you in North Carolina who ever knew Hank Broad from Greensboro, Hank was a survivor of 5 Nazi concentration camps and had a wonderful baritone voice. I used to stand him when he was alive. He went with me to Poland 9 or 10 times with groups, and I would stand him in front of this statue, and he would sing "Orphan Perpechik." It was truly, as a matter of fact, if you go to YouTube and put in the search T.E. Greensboro, you can find a picture of, a video of Hank actually singing Orphan Perpechik, the children's song that has now been turned into essentially a memorial for the 1.5 million kids who died during the Shoah. Let's go on, skip a couple of others. I'm trying to talk fast. Okay, good. Now we're at the Oyneg Shabbos archive. Now, how do we know a lot of what we know about Warsaw? It's a Jewish community. We know this from an amazing example of Warsaw, of more resistance, created by Emanuel Ringelblum, with approximately 60 people who decided to collect everything that they could, everything from documents, to paintings, to jokes, to accounts of what went on in synagogues, to business papers, to even candy wrappers. They decided to take everything that they could because Ringo said, the founder of Oneg Shabbos, and by the way, most of these people, thank you, Roy, okay, most of these people were younger people. Today we call them United Synagogue or Temple Youth. They were younger people. Mostly up to 22, 23, 24 years old. They collected all 30,000 pages of documents. And as you'll see shortly, they towards the end, they buried these documents and we found some. So if you'll take down the PowerPoint and let's go to one of the films. The one I want to show is the incredible and moving story of Oneg Shabbat. This is from the Institute of Jewish Historical Research in Warsaw. But this is it's music with subtitles. You'll get the whole story of this directly from Warsaw, better than I can tell it. Go ahead. Okay, let's go to the next one. And as you're queuing up the next one, hold on for 10 seconds. Let me just tell you that a wonderful professor named Sam Casson got access to the Oneg Shabbat archives and studied them. A lot of people studied them, but Casson wrote a book about it called Who Will Write Our History? The interesting thing is that Casson found evidence that what these people were doing in collecting all of this was hopefully that the history of what had occurred during the Warsaw Ghetto would be written by the people who suffered, by the victims. I think Florence kind of mentioned something like this in her introductory remark, not the perpetrators, because usually history is written by the perpetrators or the victors, okay? But Ringo Bloom wanted and these other 60 people who worked with him wanted the story to be told by the people who were in the Warsaw Ghetto and the victims. And they also hoped that somehow or another this message would get out in time to have an effect on saving other Jewish lives and warning the world. And to a certain extent, some of the things that they did actually did get out. Okay, they did get out and was a warning to people. But Kasov's book is 547 pages. I'm probably one of the people, I don't know how many people there are in the world that actually read all 547 pages, but you're looking at one. And in the, after tonight's session, the source material, I'm going to send out a few there's a few pages of clips, not of clips, of things that I've cut out from Kasov's book, Who Will Write Our History, that are in the part. This time, if you're looking for source material and what we're studying tonight, it's extensive. It's about 24, 25 pages, but we'll send it out. We'll send it out to you.
It's in the chat now, if you want to
Okay.
download it now.
Good. So, so here's the thing. They made Roberta Goldman, I think, or whatever her name was, decided that she was going to make a dramatization, a movie about the Oneg Shabbat archives. And I found out about it, and our congregation and I became a financial supporter of the movie. So I just want to show you the trailer. Now, this is a good movie to show to kids, a congregation. The Oneg Shabbat archive story is just an amazing story for Yom HaShoah or whatever. Here's the 2 minutes of the trailer for this film, which is an amazing film on the Shoah, on the Holocaust.
Somewhere, years ago, there was a mother who knew that her son was the cleverest, the most talented, the most beautiful. And now the brightest and most beautiful child in the world lies in a strange street. And his name isn't even known.
We should have seen the worst coming.
The Germans have embarked on a program of mass murder.
The world's turning upside down.
But we did not want to know the truth. We did not want to see it.
Does the world know about our suffering?
Emanuel Ringelblum understood that he had a story to tell, and it was the most important story he would ever have to tell.
Almost all the photography that we have was taken by the German propaganda unit.
Will the Germans write our history, or will we write our history?
That's Dr.
Let the
Kasov.
witness be our writing.
I laid the first brick for the archive in October 1939.
Their goal was to write the history of the war from the Jewish perspective. And there was no time to lose.
The worst scenario was in the process of happening.
To leave time capsules was one of the most effective forms of resistance. We can at least fight to ensure that our memory will be based on what we write and not on what the Germans show.
Our will to live is mightier than the will to destruction.
Writing becomes the only recourse. That was the ultimate act of defiance.
You don't really need guns to fight. You could fight with paper and pen.
This is what made this collection of documents so absolutely unique.
One thing is clear to all of us. Our devotion and constant terror have not been in vain.
It was a massive collection of the voices of a murdered people.
Among those taken away was Rabbi Uber,
Geli 16.
Israel Lichtenstein,
Leib Golden.
Abraham Levin.
Halina.
Emanuel Ringelblum.
Remember, my name is Nahum Gazivich.
I am writing this as a witness.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, as one who supported and gave financially to making a movie, I'm going to tell you this just to see it, but I really mean it. I really mean it. Now, in the pages that I sent out today, or that you can access after this or whenever, there's a section towards the beginning from the Oneg Shabbos archives where they wrote down a description of the children, okay? We saw the picture of the little boy, the powerful narrative that went with it. But this is actually from the archives, and I'm quoting here. The most terrible thing is to look at the freezing children, children with bare feet, bare knees, and tattered clothes who stand mutely in the streets and cry. Today in the evening, I heard the wailing of a little tot of 3 to 4 years. Probably tomorrow, they will find his little corpse. You know, it's just stuff like this. It just gets me. Even stuff regarding children, it just, you know, I think that part of the thing that goes into the description of the children from Oneg Shabbat was, there were some people that said, okay, we must say, they actually had a poster they put out, the children must live, the child is our holiest resource. And Cintos, which was a JFS type organization, did the best it could to save these kids from death. They collected close to 1 million zlotys, but some people said, Cintos, you're not, you know, the Jews, the way they are. Some people said, great job, and other people said, you're not doing enough. The passage that I referred to refers elsewhere refers to the child as the Holy of Holies. So this is good stuff, folks. This Oneg Shabbos archive, and so much of 30,000 documents, so much of what we know about the 400 to 500,000 people in prison in the ghetto comes from these archives. And 1941, as the fate became more evident, there was a plan to distribute a book or to do something to make sure that these archives were kept. But then on July 22nd, 1942, which this is an interesting thing. If you're Jewish and you know what Tisha B'Av is, Tisha B'Av is the 9th of Av, the day, a mourning day of the destruction of the first and second temples, the expulsion of the Jews from Spain supposedly took place, but actually on the 9th of Av, which was January 22nd, 1942, on that day of Jewish mourning, the deportations of 5,000 to 6,000 people a day started from Warsaw to Treblinka. And at that point, Ringelblum said, everybody turn in what you have. And 5,000 or 6,000 were deported every day. The remaining of some of the members of Oneg Shabbos managed to smuggle out 4 reports to Polish resistance that were shared with the British and American governments. These reports included detailed documentation of the mass murder in the concentration camps and contained a hand-drawn map of Treblinka. They were at the time, these reports were one of the West's major resources of information concerning the so-called Endlösung, the final solution. As in 1943, the first part of the revolt, which we'll discuss next week, had already begun. 13, I think it was 11 or 13 metal suitcases were buried. As the residents in the ghetto were starving and freezing. And just 1 week before the last part of the uprising, which took place in April 1943, milk cans were buried as well. Of the 60 people who were involved in Oneg Shabbos, only 3 survived. And after months of careful calculating, they find the rubble of an old schoolhouse. They did this by looking at where the church steeple was and trying to I guess geometrically find where it was. And they found 10 metal boxes of documents. And in 1950, in post-war communist Warsaw, a group of people that were building buildings actually stumbled upon 2 metal milk cans. The third group that was buried of milk cans was never found. We think today that it's someplace underneath the garden or in the Chinese embassy. So let's go back and we'll look at some of the pictures of this incredible thing. To number 17, please, Brant. Picture number 17. 17 shows, this is the first survivors, okay, finding the Onyx Shabbat archives.
Rabbi, I don't have numbers on my slide, so is this 17?
Oh, number 17, yeah, the one that it says on September 18th. No, go back, one before that. Sorry.
Oh, there we go, thank you.
Yeah, okay, survivors from the Onyx Shabbat are you know, one. I think the guy. I'm not sure both of these men are survivors. I don't remember exactly, but they are uncovering the first cache of the archives that were found. If you go to the next slide, you'll see a nice picture of Emanuel Ringelblum, who did not survive. He was deported to Treblinka. And we owe him so much because this is what he did. This was his example of moral resistance in many, many ways. Go to the next slide. There's a wonderful picture of, there were 300 paintings from an artist named Gila Sextain, I think, that were found there. Here's one of them. Go to the next slide. Here's what the treasure, the archives looked like. The metal cabinets that were found in 46 are on the metal kind of suitcase looking things. There are 10 of them, two or three of them are here on the left, and the milk cans from 1950 are on the right. Go down even further, okay? And here, 2 out of the 3 survivors from Onyx Shabbat were Rachel Auerbach and Hirsch Wasser, who they are unearthing. They were actually there in 46 when they unearthed the documents and started looking at this. Eventually, they'll be housed at the Jewish Historical Institute. Go to the next slide. This is a candy wrapper that was found in the Ringelblum archives. So you see, it's just a magnificent, magnificent story. And again, I highly recommend the movie. Okay. The next one is actually a piece of art that were found in the Onyx Shabbat archives of an SS man confronting the child smugglers. Okay, so this is what is going on in Warsaw. Keep on going. The next slide, please. Okay, the next slide is a picture. This is not from the archives, to the best of my knowledge, of Jewish refugees waiting in a soup line. And that's what I want to say is that the response of the community is very, very important. Creating soup kitchens and whatever, orphanages. These are all examples of moral resistance. And I have to tell you that I think it's a story that I think Florence mentioned this. It's a story that we don't tell enough, okay? The Jewish community is stressed. How do we come together? By the way, there was even a drama group there that was organized. They had a theater in the Warsaw Ghetto, and you'll never believe, I'm not going to go into the whole story of this, but you'll never believe that one of the plays that was performed in the drama group was a depiction of the story of Masada, Mount Masada in Israel. All sorts of stuff, how the community, schools, whatever, came together to try to help one another in any way possible. Go to the next one, please. Okay. This is not from the archives. This is just there's a picture of some of these pictures could have been taken by the Nazis themselves of the Warsaw, of the ghetto, of children starving in the ghetto. So that brings us to Marek Edelman. Next slide. Marek Edelman was a Polish-Jewish political and social activist and cardiologist. Edelman was the last surviving leader of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, but before his death, he was, and long before, he actually stayed in Poland. But the significance of Marek Edelman here, and we found his work even though he survived, we found his work in the Onyx Shabbos archives. Go to the next one, is that we found this description here, okay? No, it's going to be later, I'll show you. But anyway, Edelman says, with all that's going on, we have to have an underground press. And Marek Edelman, who again, shortly thereafter became one of the leaders, along with Mordechai and Alevich of the Ghetto Revolt, and Yitzhak Unterman, Marek Edelman created this underground press. The authors of the articles and the editors remained anonymous due to conspiracy reasoning. Twice a week, Edelman and his group presented these, they published an underground magazine. Go two slides down to the green one, okay? And this we found in the archives. He said that he found a mimeograph machine at a school, and he used that to be his to publish the underground newspaper. Then the question was, well, what were they going to publish? Well, there was a woman named Ruth, who had a radio in the cellar at Zamenhof Street, and she listened to the news and wrote the reports by hand. And Edelman typed them out and copied them on the mimeograph. And this is the way it worked. So go back one slide, please. Okay, and this is an example of an underground newspaper from the Warsaw Ghetto. Okay, so take the slides down for just a second. I want to pause here and take 5 minutes out of the Q&A section that's at the end to ask if anyone has a comment, because now from here we're shifting into a totally different subject of the righteous among the nations. But does anyone have a question or a comment on this type of Jewish moral and cultural resistance, of which there are many examples, but I've chosen to focus on the examples of Warsaw, particularly because of the fact that there was so much that was found in the Onyx Shabbos archives. If you have a question, I'd love to hear it before we move on to the next, or comment.
Go ahead and ask, please. Unmute.
Go ahead. Ursula, you wanted to ask a question?
It's Hans.
Okay, Hans, you have to unmute, my friend. Bran, can you unmute him?
Okay,
yeah, go.
No,
We hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I found your comments about the Warsaw Ghetto most interesting and up to date. Thank you so much for making this presentation. My question to you has to do with the Jewish leader of the Warsaw Ghetto, Adam Cherniakov. And he played an extremely important role. He sort of stood between the perpetrators, the Nazis, and the victims. And when he heard that the first Jews, and particularly also children, were taken away to Treblinka, he took his own life. He killed himself, I think it was in July of 1942. You mentioned
July 23rd, the day after Tisha B'Av.
Yeah, correct.
Okay,
So
the day after the first deportation.
Yeah, so you mentioned a monument dedicated to Korczak, but I wonder, is there any monument in memory of Adam Cherniakov, either in Warsaw? We were in Warsaw and I didn't see it, or in Jerusalem, or anywhere else. Is there no monument?
What's your name, Hans? Hans?
Yeah.
You know why you didn't see it? Because you weren't with me. Okay? That's why you didn't see it, because I take everyone to see the Cherniakov monument. Now, the interesting thing is that Chernikov wrote a letter to that somehow or another got out. His last letter, his suicide note, was written to the Polish government in exile in London. Okay. Now, one of the things that I mentioned last week, thank you so much. I owe you a cup of coffee one day for asking such a great question, Hans. Okay. The idea behind this was that he was so frustrated that 6,000 Jews the day before had been deported to Treblinka, and then another 6,000. By the way, excuse me for using my hands so much. If you want to make if you want to have a Jew silence a Jew, all you have to do is tie up our hands. Okay, but anyway, so he wanted to get that message out because there was no Jewish government in exile. And he felt that if he could get it to the Poles would get it to the Allies would get it, would decide what to do, and they would bomb the train tracks or bomb the bridges, which for the most part, they never did. But, there's a lot of interesting stuff about Chernikov because as much as that was important, there are still people within the Jewish scholarly or Jewish community, particularly, that some of them I knew from years ago that were survivors that did not approve of what he did because he felt that the people felt that Chernikov had too much of an important role in helping the community deal with the tragedy. But that's a great question, Hans. I owe you a cup of coffee.
Yeah, where can I get my cup of coffee with you?
In Warsaw.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but we'll go. Actually, there is a monument, and it's not far. It's probably 150 yards from Mila 18, the last bunker. Okay, it's on the walk of what's called the Walk of Heroism. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because if I don't, we'll never go on to the next topic. So let's go on to the next slide if we can. Okay. Yes, and one after that. Okay, now when we talk about people that did things to help other people, and I'm going to apologize in advance for this because I've got about 20 minutes to do this, and before I'm going to stop for more Q&A. Otherwise, Sharon and Flo will be very mad at me. Not really, but they will be. But anyway, this is going to be a little bit quick. But I'm interested in these non-Jews who helped Jews or who saved Jews. They are called the Hasidei Umot Olam, the righteous among the nations. Yad Vashem has recognized, I think, 11 or 12,000 of them, and it still goes on to this day. In 1953, the Israeli Knesset passed the Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Laws, which defined the meaning of the righteous among the nations as one who extended help in saving the life of a Jewish person, endangered one's own life to do so. This is very important, okay? Particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, if you tried to save a Jew and were caught, you would be killed. In Western Europe, more often than not, you'd just be sent to a labor camp. These were also people that did not seek a reward. And number 4, there are people that acted in a way that stands out as above or beyond what can be termed as ordinary help. Like, go down there, maybe somebody has food. That's ordinary help. Go to the next slide. Okay. Now, there were the main forms of help that were extended by these righteous non-Jews fell into 4 categories. Okay. The first one is that they hid Jews in the rescuer's home or on their property. The second one is they provided false papers or false identities. The third is they smuggled and assisted Jews to escape. And the fourth was they rescued children. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. And I owe my friend Lee Holder for this, because he pointed out this is on an IB site, which I think Lee will be an International Baccalaureate site or whatever, dealing with bystanderism. And the one that it's not a site that's dealing with the Holocaust, it's like dealing with I won't go into it, the whole Kitty Genovese thing from years ago, more than a half a century ago. But bystanderism has actually now been defined as a word. Bystanderism is, and you can look it up, okay? Maybe Lee or somebody, if you can put in the chat where I got this from, this would be great. The bystanderism is the phenomenon of a person or people not intervening despite awareness of another person's needs, i.e., an individual is less likely to help in an emergency situation when passive bystanders are present. It can cover a range of situations, from being aware that a neighbor being physically abusive to his family ignores it, walking past someone lying slumped on a pavement as others preceding you have done, or ignoring the plight of a bullied child at school. Okay, ignoring. So this is bystander. Now I will tell you that that Lee is and some of the work that the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust is doing is incredibly important, and I think it has to do with bystanderism and, to a large extent, and upstanderism. Lee, if you want to jump in, you can. But I think that we're trying to teach kids in North Carolina the difference between bystanderism and upstanderism, especially in the face of injustice. Lee, did you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I do know that DPI has just released the study of the Holocaust through character education. I think it's basically called emotional and social learning now, but they've just released that and have done a couple presentations. So that's a whole new area that we're going to be able to teach this with a relevance to the students' lives.
Great, great. And I think DPI is the Department of Public Instruction. And I think that it's really important that when a teacher is teaching high school kids a unit on the Holocaust, that they deal specifically with the story of these righteous among the nations, because these are the non-Jews, okay? Most of these children that are going to be taught this are not Jewish kids, but these are non-Jews who stood up for somebody else, in this case, Jews. And I think that there should be like kind of a subunit on the righteous among the nations and everything that we do, okay, and every time that we teach it. Okay, so go to the next slide, please, Brent, and we'll continue. All right, so in terms of righteous among the nations, okay, here's some people that are on my list of favorite people. By the way, there is an article, I think it was Florence said, why did these righteous people save Jews? This is a topic of an enormous amount of research, both historical, psychological, environmental, behavioral. I didn't include that article in the article I have on that in the handouts or the source material that I have. So the answer is not a uniform answer, okay? But I thought that before we get into this, Ursula, I would like to ask you just a second to unmute your screen, and let's go back to you. Take down the slide here for just a second, Brant. And Ursula, would you give us 2 or 3 minutes? Because I understand that you've got a story to tell about Righteous Among the Nations from your family. You have to unmute, sweetie.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very proud and happy to tell you that my parents have a tree at Yad Vashem, and they were recognized by Yad Vashem with a medal because they were designed righteous tiles. What happened was my father was a Christian minister, and he had served in World War I, which was a terrible experience for him. He was very patriotic, went in at 17 years old and came out basically as a pacifist. He saw that all this violence was just devastating, didn't do any good. And so he became very sensitive to violence, to anybody who wanted to take power and diminish other people. So he was opposed to the Nazis from the very beginning, from 1933 on, and got into trouble. He was on the blacklist and was in prison for a while, lost his job. But then he went on, and because he lost his job, he finally, a year later, found a small congregation in the country, 500 people, all farmers, and then another church next door, also a small village, which I don't know if that enabled him better to keep Jews in our home. He was, of course, he never acted alone. He was from the beginning, wie heißt es?
Chain of pastors.
Yeah, the pastor's chain, but also the
confessing church.
Confessing church, of course. So he was in contact with other people who resisted, and he heard from Berlin that they were looking for places where Jews from Berlin could be, and he said, "Yes, okay, I'm on," and he tried to find other colleagues and other people to offer their homes when people came. And so it was on Christmas 1943 that somebody arrived at our house, a couple from Berlin. They were Jews, and they were expected. My parents expected them, and they were invited in, and they kept them for, I guess, you could keep them 4 weeks before you had to go to the police and register people. So they were trying to get people out after 4 weeks to the next place, which he has already. They had this whole chain of homes, and that happened. There were other Jews who came, stayed with us, and left again, and the police came and checked on our house every so often. It was very anxious for my mother. My father was usually out of the house with his congregations, and so she had to deal with them, and often she just told them, the Jewish people, to go through the back door, and she talked to the police. Nothing happened, even though they had lots of papers from his past. But the party was not in that village. There very little interest. So they got away with it, and people got friends who were often very critical of my mother, especially because we were 5 children in the family. And she said, "You're not only risking your own life, you're risking the lives of your children." And my mother had the wonderful answer and saying, when so many parents are willing to give their kids to this terrible war, we should be able to risk something for something that's good and right. And that's how she always supported my father. And that
was great. So were you in Jerusalem when they were did they receive the medal in Jerusalem from Yad Vashem?
I was here in America.
Not your brother.
Oh,
My-
but was
father
in, yeah.
Excuse
And
me?
your brother was in Jerusalem? Were your parents still alive when your father's still
Yeah, my
alive?
parents, yes, they went to Jerusalem once for, I don't know how long exactly it was. I was here already. So and later for planting the tree, my brother did that. He went down to Yad Vashem. They were still alive, but they were old and not
Have
able
you seen the tree that he planted?
Yeah,
Yes.
we were there. Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, good, because I already owed you one cup of coffee in Warsaw. I was going to give you another one in Jerusalem.
Oh, good.
But if you,
Can I add one, I think, important
Sure.
thing? Ursula said her father was a member of the Confessing Church. However, there were numerous pastors who were not members of the Confessing Church. They were the so-called German Christians. When her father, wait a minute, something.
It's okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah. When
Yeah,
her
go
father
ahead.
tried to identify other pastors who were willing to take the Jews in, he had to be extremely careful, because who could you trust? And he couldn't just say, well, they're Protestant pastors, they can be trusted. No, that was not the case. Only certain limited number of people could be approached. Not only that, but her brother often went on bicycle contacting and looking up other pastors willing to take the risk. And so it was a very, very dangerous kind of thing. For example, they couldn't use a telephone. The Gestapo listened to the telephone. So it was a very, very difficult assignment.
And of course, the Jews who were staying with us, when they left, often couldn't use public transportation. They often had to walk or take a train that was safe, that they knew, there was this local train. And so my brother often accompanied them when they were walking on his bike and, went along for safety.
Okay, good. All right, so let's go on. If you can, Ursula and Hans, put the name of your father in the chat, because I want to look him up later. So let's go back to the slides. Okay. Now, in the next, how much time do I have? Not much. But in the next 10 or 15 minutes, I wanted to go through a couple of these. And actually, I want to start with Raoul Wallenberg. If you can go down, we'll have to, let's start here, okay? Who are the righteous among the nations, okay? This just goes into the idea that Yad Vashem, the National Remembrance Authority, bestows honors on these individuals like they did Ursula's father, and I guess his mother. The country with the most righteous Gentiles, righteous among the nations, Poland is more than 2,000. The country with the highest proportion is Netherlands. Go to the next slide. Okay, we'll come back to that. Keep on going down to Raoul Wallenberg, because somebody, I think it was, keep on going down, down, and one more. No? There you go. Okay. So the reason why I'm jumping ahead to Raoul Wallenberg is the story of Raoul Wallenberg is that he was a Swedish diplomat that was in Budapest. And the Hungarian Jewish community was not deported until 1944. There was a government, a puppet government in Hungary that was controlling the situation, but Jews were not being deported until 44. At which time there'll be 12,000 within a very few months. There'll be 12,000 Jews a day that are deported. The only ghetto in Europe that was actually liberated, Jewish ghetto, was the one in Budapest. But the interesting thing about Raoul Wallenberg was, as a Swedish diplomat, he did all sorts of things to save Jews, including renting buildings, tall apartment buildings or whatever, and throwing up a Swedish flag on the roof and saying this is a diplomatic building, and therefore we've got diplomatic immunity for that. They started printing out Swedish papers and whatever. And this, by the way, was this printing of papers was very, very important in terms of saving lives. It's estimated that we really don't know. Sometimes people say 20,000, sometimes as many as 100,000 people that could have been saved by Raoul Wallenberg. By the way, there's an old film that you can get that stars none other than Dr. Kildare, Richard Chamberlain. I think it was made in 1985. So it's a pretty good film about what Raoul Wallenberg did. After the war, the Soviets imprisoned him, and we didn't know for years exactly what had happened to him. So, but later on, I think in the 50s or 60s, the Soviets said that he had died in captivity in 1947. Apparently, the Soviets felt that he was a spy. But he is one, in terms of the number of Jews saved, he is one of the two most important Jews that there are. Now, the second one, and I will put this in the chat. The second is Simple Sugihara. It's estimated that Sugihara, and I put this in there, could have saved. He was in Lithuania, and actually in I think it's Vilna, and that he did something very, very similar. He was the Japanese attaché or whatever, the diplomat there, and that by doing all of these printing documents and giving them to Jews, that he could have saved as many as 100,000. So they fall into the same category. And again, at the bottom, it says that he could have saved as many as 100,000. All right, but let's go back, and I apologize that we're doing this very, very fast. Yeah, okay. So the rescue, let's go to the next one down now. So the Jews of Denmark were rescued. You go up one of the map, by being ferried across into Sweden, the neutral Sweden. On the boats like go down now, you can see the sort of boats, a picture during the German occupation of Denmark. And keep on going down. One of the interesting things about this was that King Christian of Denmark, who was also the people of Denmark, the Danish underground, and King Christian X of Denmark are three separate groups that have been recognized by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations. King Christian actually was told that the Nazis said, on one particular day, that everybody had to wear the yellow badge. And King Christian said that if everybody, if all the Jews have to start wearing a yellow badge, I will put on a yellow badge, and I will instruct the population to put on a yellow badge. This is very, very important, because identification is basically the second part of the instruction process. You have to define who a Jew is, then you have to identify. So the yellow badges were very important to identify Jews during the Holocaust. And because of this, I think there was only somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 Jews of Denmark, of the total population, that died because of the Danish underground, the Danish people, and King Christian of Denmark. So this is a very nice story in and of itself. Go to the next slide, please. Yeah, nice picture of the king. Go on down. The next one Irina Sindler, who I actually met 20 years ago. I met her. When I met her, she looked like the picture on the right before she died. She died, I think, in 2008. I don't remember. But I think I met her in the early 2000s with one of the groups and she came and she gave testimony to our groups is what she had done. She is considered to have saved 2,500 Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto, and she was active in an underground group called Żegota, which was a Polish group that was in Warsaw that was designed to save Jews, and she was part of the subcommittee or something like that, who said we're going to save Jewish children. And this is pictures of what she has. Go to the next slide, please. And this is a monument in Poland near the Polish Museum of Polish Jewish History, and on the Martyrs Memorial Walk near the statue of the resistance of the Warsaw Ghetto Revolt. There's a wonderful statue here. It says the organization established in the Polish underground state to rescue Jews of the Holocaust. It was the only such organization in German-occupied Europe, which was sponsored and funded by its government in exile. Halavai, only should have been told that there should have been more organizations. On every trip I take to Poland, I always show this monument as well. Let's go on. We're just going to have to skip forward. Oskar Schindler, I'm going to skip over him because of the movie, which is now 27 years old, and also because of the fact that there's a bio of Oskar Schindler in the materials I'm going to send out. You can go to see Schindler's factory in Krakow. It's right on the edge of what became the Krakow ghetto in World War II. It's now a museum and tells the story of Schindler. Go to the next one. Here, as you can tell, I have a real soft spot in my heart for children. This is Eupen and Willy Westerweel. The picture, the Westerweels, they have a tree planted for them. They've been acknowledged by Yad Vashem, and also by the and also the Westerweel resistance group that they founded has been recognized by Yad Vashem. And in Israel, there's a forest planted by the people that the Westerweels saved during the Holocaust. What they did, they tried to, first they took in children even before the Nazis attacked the Netherlands. They took in children who were refugees from Nazi-occupied Europe, and then once the Nazis conquered deportation, they engaged in an effort to smuggle Jews out in any way in any way they could out of Nazi-occupied Europe. The most famous one was that they took a whole group of kids from down through Belgium, France to the Pyrenees, and took them up into the Pyrenees and sent them over to Spain, which was neutral. And Westerweel told them at that time, you need to go to Palestine. You need to create be involved in creating a Jewish state, so that what happened here will never happen again. But at the same time, you must be a pursuer of peace. So what I like about this, Rabbi Bernstein, I don't know if you ever studied Willy on the right, but those are her 4 kids. Okay, so these people, these are not kids that she saved. They are this couple's 4 children. So these people did this extraordinary. They did this because they did this in spite of the fact that they were endangering not only their own lives. Both of them will die. Joop is the man dies having been taken a prisoner and sent to a concentration camp, trying to smuggle 2 or 3 Jewish girls in Belgium. But the Westerwheels are a great story. Their bio is in the material that I've prepared. Keep on going. We'll get through this rather quickly. I think we have one more to do. Next slide, please. Go back. Charles Coward. Charles Coward is one of my favorite stories. Charles Coward is a British airman that was shot down, and he is taken to a prisoner of war camp, and apparently he spoke German, and he becomes a liaison with the Germans in the camp, and eventually they send him to Monowitz, which is the IG Farben factory 5 miles from Auschwitz-Birkenau, and it's actually part of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Monowitz, by the way, was bombed by the Allies. They were making synthetic rubber and chemicals there, but he comes in and he becomes known as the Count of Auschwitz. He asked, he said, listen, we British people are Aryans. Can I go? I hear you're doing some amazing work at Birkenau. Can I go with you? And he actually went to Birkenau with the Nazis, with the SS, and they showed him around. And at one time he swapped out his uniform with somebody that was a prisoner in Birkenau that was working in Monowitz for a day, and he spent the night in Birkenau. And then he came back, and then he decided that he was going to try to save Jews. And so he went to the SS and he said, I will trade you Red Cross rations of chocolate and cigarettes for Jews. And the reason why I want to trade you these because we're Aryans too, and we want to beat them to death. And he took those Jews. He managed to find to collect uniforms of people who had died in the Monowitz, in the prisoner of war camp, and he swapped out uniforms of these dead soldiers with Jews and put the Jewish pajama uniforms on the dead soldiers who were dying in Monowitz. It's estimated, if I remember correctly, that Coward saved 200 to 300 Jews out of the grips of death of the death camp of Birkenau. And Charles Coward is, to the best of my knowledge, the only person from Great Britain that is considered to be righteous among nations. There probably are more out of 12,000, but not many. And what was interesting to me, the most interesting thing about Charles Coward is his name. Okay, this is a man whose name is Coward, who's probably one of the bravest people I ever heard about in my life. So take the slides down. We have maybe a minute for a question or two. Next week is not our session, but it'll be in two weeks where we'll deal with active and physical and active resistance, and also the role of women in resistance. So anybody have a quick question or comment before we go? I apologize if we went a little bit over tonight, but I think it was really worth it. Maybe we can take another 10 minutes and for comments or Q&A.
Feel free to unmute yourself.
Who's got a question, comment?
If no one does, I have one.
Sure.
I'm fascinated by the Judenrat and what extremely difficult position they were in, having to make what they call choiceless choices. So can you comment a little bit about their predicament?
Yes, it was terrible because understand something. The people in the Judenrat were people that today would be like on the city council or on a Jewish Federation board. They were not the young people. They were not the young people. They were not the people that would, according to Lucy Davidowitz, they were not in the war against the Jews. They were not the people that organized Jewish resistance, but they were key in organizing community. And part of the reason why Chernyakov took his own life is because he was told that the UNRWA eventually would be responsible for providing 5,000 or 6,000 Jews a day to the train station. And he couldn't do that because he said that basically, I imagine in his mind, he said that would make me an accomplice to murder. So on one side, they had their community, and on the other side, they had the SS, and they were caught in the middle, okay? Now, does the Jewish community consider to be those who served on the UNRWA to be traitors or heroes? The answer is neither, okay? But people who were in very compromised situations did the best that they could. Now, by contrast, there was also something called the Jewish police. And these were people who could be quite cruel, Jews who could be quite cruel to other Jews, who were doing so and had volunteered to be part of the police in order to save their own skins. When the Warsaw Ghetto Revolt breaks out, the first part of it, in January 1943, the first people that are killed are going to be the Jewish police. So it's a very, very difficult. I hope that answers your question, Sharon. But it's the best I can do. Good. Other questions? Don't be bashful. Anything? Comments?
No.
Okay.
So we're recording this session, and if you want to refer back to it, we'll make the link available to you. We look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. And thank you so much, Rabbi Gutman. You have an encyclopedic knowledge. You're amazing. We so appreciate you.
That's the problem, according to my wife. once I start talking about the Holocaust and the Shoah, he says, you just go on and on. A stream of consciousness, you never know what's going to come out of your mouth. So I apologize if it was too much, but I appreciate the compliment.
No, thank you all. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Have a good week.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Be well. Lee, Rabbi Bernstein, if you're on, I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Brand.